Hello, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another wonderful Wednesday webinar for the climate in 2012, Quetzalcoatl 2012, and also the amazing book How Soon Is Now, and also When Plants Dream. But what we want to talk about tonight, because climate emergency centres, there's about 32 of them around the UK now, using vacant shops. They're focused on solutions and getting solutions out in the high street. Daniel's book, How Soon Is Now, is an absolutely incredible planetary repair manual talking about a lot of regenerative futures and solutions and how we work our way towards that. So regenerative solutions is one of the big conversations tonight. So Daniel, thank you very much for coming. If you could tell us a bit more about the How Soon Is Now and some of the regenerative solutions you outline in the book, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Cool, Phoenix. Yeah, thanks again for having me. And I apologize for being late. I'm actually in France right now, and I'm on a weird schedule and so. So yeah, the genesis of this book. I mean, just briefly about my career before that book. I'd written a book on psychedelic shamanism called Breaking Open the Head that came out in 2002. And even in that book, I was very focused on the ecological crisis in a sense. And I was really wondering if kind of insight from psychedelics, particularly natural psychedelics like ayahuasca and mushrooms, might have a be something that would catalyze a kind of shift in individual and then ultimately collective consciousness around our interconnectivity with the earth and the biosphere and all that stuff. So I wrote that book. And then I wrote a book looking at the prophecies of indigenous cultures like the Aztecs and the Hopi and the Maya, and sort of comparing those with sort of the Judeo-Christian ideas of the apocalypse and so on, and looking at the Yuga cycle from Hindu culture, Vedanta. And yes, then after that book, which sort of for me kind of confirms kind of the value in these prophecies, these indigenous knowledge systems, and also through the process of researching those books, I went through a personal shift from being a kind of like skeptic, scientific materialist, to having like many different psychic and paranormal and telepathic experiences, that ultimately I became what's called a monistic or analytic idealist. I don't know if people have heard that term, but it's become more and more philosophically defined recently. Bernardo Kastrup, I'll put him in the chat, is one very good thinker. One of his books is called Why Materialism is Baloney. He was a scientist at CERN. I think he's Dutch. And so he basically went through a process of interrogation recognized that it was much more logical to understand consciousness as the foundational layer rather than the physical world. And this is something that seems to, mesh very well with recent discoveries of quantum physics. 2022, the Nobel Prize went to discoveries that the universe was not locally real. So if there's not an observer kind of collapsing the wave into a sort of particle, reality is a little bit more like a flux or an energetic kind of has more like an energetic fluidic quality. So strangely enough, I do think all this philosophy plays into kind of how we can think about the ecological emergency, and also maybe gives us some expanded ideas from what our possible future scenarios are going forward. So yeah, I mean, I have to admit that so I spent like 10 years off and on working on that book, How Soon Is Now. It nearly broke me on many, financially as well as like psychologically. And I was really hoping it'd be a very big book when it came out, and I had some friendships with Russell Brand, who at that point was still on the left, and had actually written about my work in some of his books. And also I've had a long-term friendship with Sting, the musician. So they wrote introductions for the book, and I really hoped it was going to be like a very big book and make ripples in the culture, but it sort of didn't. And I don't know if it was so I've often wondered what was wrong with the book, or what if the timing was wrong, or what was wrong with me, or whatever. But I think also we live in a culture where in the mainstream people are more used to thinking in terms of dystopias and catastrophic outcomes, and we don't really we don't have a strong culture around thinking about yeah, building something, that could be like a lot better or whatever. Particularly if it requires like a very, what for most people is too abstract to conceive of kind of like a systems change. So basically when I wrote How Soon Is Now, I sort of like, I think there's an aspect of the psychedelic experience is it kind of like can kind of like deprogram you from, ideologies and kind of different cultural patterns and so on. So in a way, the book was an effort to look at our situation on the Earth as if I was like, maybe a space alien who'd set up a base on like a moon of like Saturn or something, and then hung out for like millions of years, just like watch the show or something like that. And from that kind of angle, yeah, you could see the evolution of humanity as maybe an extension of the Earth's evolution in certain respects, and even our evolution of technology and everything that's kind of happened up till this very moment seems in some ways like yeah, an outgrowth of like a Gaian entelechy or something. So like we've just in the way microbes form an eye or something. We create satellite dishes. Our technologies are all these prosthetic extensions of our sensory capacities and our cognitive capacities and so on, our physical capacities. We went from, I mean, one of the many different types of theories I looked at in the book was the theory of the noosphere. Nous being a word that means like mind. So the idea that the Earth not only has like a atmosphere and a lithosphere, like a minerals level, and a hydrosphere, like a water level, it also has a noosphere, like a thought level, like a layer of thoughts around the Earth. This is an idea that there was a Catholic French paleontologist and mystic, Teilhard de Chardin, who wrote a lot about the noosphere, and also a Russian cosmophysicist, Vernadsky. And both of them kind of had developed the same idea in the early part of the 20th century, that there was maybe like a tendency in our evolution towards kind of like meshing the world ultimately together into kind of like a giant thought or kind of a integrated mentality, consciousness, technology. So you could see like we had the biosphere, which is organic life on Earth. Then over the last 5,000 years, humanity has developed what we call the technosphere. So towns, roads, shipping routes, satellites, fiber optic cables, et cetera, et cetera. It's like we've covered the whole Earth at a kind of girdle of technology. And the idea that these thinkers explored, and also Jose Arguelles is another thinker that I wrote a lot about in my second book.
Yeah, love him. Yes, Gillis.
Yeah, he is great. He's kind of like very neglected
Yeah.
compared to Terence McKenna. But he wrote a book called actually I edited and published his last book, Manifesto for the Noosphere. But he basically felt that we would kind of move beyond technology into more of like a post-technological civilization. I mean, where we would recognize kind of how we'd gone too far, and we would sort of, re-engineer, kind of create like a garden planet, and then rediscover like psychic technologies like telepathy, communing with the garden, tantra, and so on.
His book,
Still might
Surface
happen.
of the Zavuya, we read in the 90s
Yeah,
about the greater memory circuit, and was a big inspiration, to us, But I
yeah,
just wanted to say your book, How Soon Is Now, has inspired and sent ripples through many people, and it is packed with so many solutions. It really is, a manual for planetary repair. I remember we had you on the Global Solutions Zone TV thing we did about 8 years ago, and you have inspired many, many, many people to, the book has had a big effect,
oh, that's really nice
on
to hear. Yeah, yeah,
inspiring people to think about solutions, because current cultures, it is a lot of doom stories. And, there is so many bits in the book that you go into renewable energies and future,
yeah,
future democracies and future ways of looking at things, and sustainable and regenerative
yeah.
solutions.
I'm getting to all that, Phoenix. I'm just taking my
Lovely,
own
lovely.
meandering path towards it. Um,
Loving it.
so anyway, so yeah, so looking at the Earth from this like outer space perspective, I was sort of thinking about what are the levels that we would have to address to avert complete catastrophic breakdown from climate change and toxification and so on. And so the three main areas that I felt would need to be addressed were the technical infrastructure part. So that's like the energy, the waste management, transport, et cetera, agriculture and so on. And then the social systems, which is like the political systems, the governance system, and the economic systems, finance, and then thirdly, consciousness, which is kind of in a way, determines the others in a way. And consciousness is something that's kind of formed and shaped by media and by marketing, by education, by different systems of indoctrination. I got really interested in like Antonio Negri is like a post-Marxist Italian thinker who talked about how in post-industrial civilization, the most important form of production or hegemonic form of production is no longer material stuff. It's more subjectivity in itself. So it's more like immaterial production. What immaterial production ultimately is producing is subjectivity. So I think we can see with like, television, social media, social networks, there's a huge battle over, producing a certain level of subjectivity that fits with the kind of consumer capitalist society. And actually, I think it's a very interesting moment because I think in the U.S., they're basically signaling to us that phase of consumer capitalism with a sort of like limited democratic participation, the kind of tech overlords have now merged with the kind of political elite are basically telling us that system is now over. And you can see kind of this effort to construct like a new subjectivity. So no longer around like individual consumerism and kind of limited freedoms. It's now they're trying to like, repackage a new subjectivity around, I guess in a way, older values like, patriotism, Christian nationalism, the nuclear family, the patriarchy, patriarchal kind of attitudes and so on. So so of those three areas, in a way, the technical systems are the most obvious. Like we all kind of know, more or less, what could be done, and there's a whole lot of things that we know that aren't getting done. So, for instance, painting the rooftops of the cities white to replace the albedo effect. Having rooftop gardens, growing more food locally. And then all the regenerative farming, renewable energy, and so on. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, it is kind of incredible in the U.S. right now that one of the good things that Biden did was the Inflation Reduction Act, which was mandating a massive amount of renewable energy infrastructure to be built in the U.S. And Trump has now just rejected that. So he's going to make us more kind of like kind of dependent on Saudi Arabian and Russian oil. And we can get into that if you want. I can give you my little political analysis on what's happening. But yeah, so we know in these different areas, like there's technologies that could be employed at scale that could help a lot, like biochar, which is a way to kind of replenish soil with carbon, creating this sort of carbon-rich till through the slow burning process that's used in the Amazon. If we wanted to replenish the oceans and reverse acidification, we would have to do massive amounts of aquaculture, which would be like huge kelp farms. That stuff is edible. So you'd be creating an edible product, but you'd have to do like, it would be like 7% of the ocean body. So it'd be like a massive engineering feat to do that. But, so in a sense, all the technical stuff is like, more or less we know what we should be doing. We're just not doing it because of the political and economic system and because of the level of consciousness. So in a way, those are actually the harder things to shift. And yeah, in the book, I looked at different thinkers and philosophies. I got very interested in Murray Bookchin, who's a social ecologist, kind of an anarchist. He wrote a book called The Ecology of Freedom. Kind of like Rousseau, who argued that private property was kind of like the beginning of inequality. Bookchin argued that in a society based on private property rights, you would have inherent inequality, and you would never be able to create a truly sustainable or regenerative system. So he advocated for shifting from ownership as a model to usufruct, which apparently is a concept that was known in the Middle Ages and before, where it's like kind of the right to use to keep using something as long as you're productively using it, whether it's like a resource or a tool or whatever. So it'd be more like stewardship. It would be more like how indigenous people understand like their relationship to stuff, nature and stuff. And yeah, I also looked at love and sexuality. Like I visited a community in Portugal called Tamara, which calls itself a peace research laboratory. And they were like started by Germans who were born in the shadow of the Second World War. And they were trying to figure out after the 60s why the different efforts to build utopian communities or kind of left ecological spiritual movements kind of failed. And they began to realize that it was issues around love, sexuality, jealousy, possessiveness that often ended up those movements failing. So they sort of tried to deconstruct the whole relationship paradigm and start from scratch. So it's a community, it's in Portugal, it's mainly Germans, Northern Europeans, but 350 people live there now. And yeah, most people are in multi-partner relationships. And they have kind of love networks. And they see love and eros as something that is too big to be an individual responsibility. That in a sense, there has to be kind of like a community kind of like oversoul that where everybody sort of works together, collaborates in a way around this stuff. It's fascinating. I don't know if it's fully successful, but they're also very into permaculture, and it's a very dry area, but they created a sort of water retention landscape. They brought in these lakes and built streams, and they greenified the whole area. And so they talk also about kind of how a community relates with water and how a community relates to love are very kind of connected. So, you know, as with water, water needs like basins of containment and opportunities like overflow and flow. It's the same with love. It needs both like secure basins of containment and also ways to spill and flow and move around and so on. So yeah, that was the kind of, those are some of the ideas that interest me. But I can go into, you know, any piece of it that anybody wants. Should I stop there, Phoenix? Then we take questions or whatever.
That's very good, Daniel. Yeah, I mean, so much in there. Thank you for your deep research. I mean, yeah, we can take questions from folks. We can, you know,
I see there's questions in this chat. I can try to.
Yeah, we got
maybe people want
good
to.
ones
People,
already lined up there.
okay,
people
Doc.
want to ask them yourself, Nicola. You want to step up and ask your question?
I don't know if Analia wants to ask the question in person and just to speak it on to the Zoom. Are you able to do that,
that's
Analia?
fine.
Yeah, hi.
Nicola, go for it.
Yep. Hi, Daniel. Yes, I read Breaking the Head when it came out. So yeah, that was seems like a long time ago now, but thanks for the book.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've kind of got a history. I've been working in the Amazon on regenerative agriculture for 20 years. And I have, you know, major concern as I've seen over the last decade, the ayahuasca use. And, you know, hearing, you know, old shamans who not only are they worried about it disappearing from the Amazon because of over Western consumption, but you know, their ideas of taking the spirit away from the land to another place that it doesn't come from, and you know, these very, very different understandings to, you know, the way that, you know, they would drink is never about the individual. It's always about the collective and the community. And so how we've kind of changed that context for, you know, our own use. And just, yeah, that's the, you know, I mean, there was a report, I put it in the link of, you know, shamans that are getting really worried about it just disappearing. They say from Iquitos now, you can't find an ayahuasca vine for 80 kilometers in any direction. So yeah, just wondering kind of like what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. I write a newsletter. I'll put the newsletter in the chat here. But I've been covering, you know, going back and thinking about the issues around the psychedelic movements. When I wrote Breaking Open the Head, it just felt so unlikely that it would be made so, you know, accepted again. And and incorporating into a culture that really is very much about individuality, that doesn't really understand the value of these indigenous practices, and also maybe sometimes the idealism we've had about these cultures too is a problem. And then the capitalization of psychedelics now, and there's these billion-dollar companies starting, and some of them are actually started by or now run by some of the same right-wing kind of types, sort of tech libertarian types, who are causing a lot of hassle in the US. So I think Lycos, for instance, I know there's a lot to discuss there.
That's a very big question, and there's a lot in there. And thank you, Daniel, for that.
Hey, Felix, I just wanted to like quickly just add to that, and just also say about like the way that like in the UK, if you want to get access to these like plant medicines, there's a whole kind of movement around them, which is kind of gatekeeping them, and only certain people kind of get access to them as well, because they become very expensive, very exclusionary. So there's whole sort of extra additional kind of cultural kind of and financial concerns about like who can do these things, and they're becoming very only a certain group of people have easy access to them.
Okay, this is a much larger discussion.
Sure.
Anna-Leah, I think, has a question there to Daniel. Anna-Leah, do you want to ask that one?
I'm always interested when someone goes through a process, and in this case, you're writing a book and spending such a long time going through that process. What were your most hopeful findings or realization in that process? And did you have any perspective before writing your book? Any major change?
By the way, I put an excellent recent piece, not by me, in the chat about the issues around the psychedelic capitalism. I thought that this piece really captured a lot of my concerns and other people's concerns that I'm friends with. Well, I think that that's a good question. Also, by the way, the book came out in 2016, so now it's like, or 2017, so now it's like 8 years later. And at the moment, considering what's happening in the US, I'm feeling a lot of like, grief and sadness more than like optimism and like exuberance about our possibilities in the near term. Particularly, I mean, nobody's even talking about the ecological crisis anymore. Like, it's just off the table in the US right now, which is just insane. I mean, on the plus side, sometimes things have to get really bad until there's a total collective awareness and then a movement in another direction. So, this does feel like a revolutionary or proto-revolutionary circumstance. Like at the moment, it's a counter-revolution of the right, but there could be a moment where that triggers into a more like leftist revolution. But I don't understand the level to which climate change is just off the table as part of the political discourse. Anyway, so among the thinkers who really inspired me were this Antonio Negri and Michael Hart with his book Multitude, Hannah Arendt's book on revolution. So I think it is important to remember always that, I mean, let's say like capital is ultimately a social relation. So, if you have a billionaire who walks into a room and everybody's like, ooh, the billionaire with all the money, but they don't really actually possess that. It's not part of their being. It's just something that's like ascribed to them. It's like based on cultural conventions, that we believe that these like signatures on documents and data swirling in all of these, banks and, sort of just data systems, it's all virtual, so capital is basically a belief system or a social relation that we all reify with our minds. So what that means is that, at any moment that could also dissolve, if these people push it to the limit as they're doing it into the US, there might be a point where people are just like, what, like, this thing that they claim that they are, it's just trash, So that's what Arendt saw as like something like she had a line about how it's always a surprise when this threshold comes, when this sort of sudden universal refusal to obey then triggers, what becomes like a revolt or rebellion or revolution. So, and then, Antonio Negri in Multitude, he was kind of like they were trying to figure out who would be the kind of revolutionary subject of history. Like, Marx had thought the proletariat would be, and certainly there were all these like, urban labor struggles in the early part of the 20th century that led to the New Deal and so on. But now, in a way, you could say that it's the knowledge worker or the cognitive laborer is more likely to be the sort of center of a revolutionary struggle. And while it's a very dangerous kind of knife edge situation, when we look at what's happening with artificial intelligence and artificial general intelligence, I do think there's a possibility for a rapid, kind of shift in awareness as a lot of cognitive laborers are going to lose their work or be laid off, and cross disciplines, from like software to design to film to legal systems to phone sales. As all of that gets sort of absorbed by AI, there is the possibility that, before everybody like loses their resources and become like data slaves, we could have a collective realization that, we need to negotiate like a new social contract. And in a way, if all of those types of jobs, which are really not very good jobs for people anyway, were to be absorbed into the sort of AI, that could potentially liberate most of humanity to focus on regenerative redesign. So, gardening, repairing damaged wetlands, kind of like, bringing species, nurturing species back into habitation and so on. So I think I think we're like an all or nothing moment right now, because they're talking about AGI in the next 3 to 5 years. It's already pretty damn close. And so basically, I think there needs to be a movement, beyond the climate movement, that's really about addressing this technological frontier and basically forcing like a new social contract. And as a result of that, I think there could be maybe a movement into a more ecologically regenerative paradigm, because that's what people would be most suited to do if they don't have to do all this. Yeah, if we don't have all this cognitive labor to do anymore. So in terms of your own movement, you might want to think about incorporating that. It's also kind of like, so one of the big inspirations for the How Soon Is Now book was an essay by Oscar Wilde called The Soul of Man Under Socialism. And he kind of argued that in the past, most people really never got to really discover or kind of like cultivate, let's say, their unique self or their unique individuality, because they were just forced to do a lot of drudgery and they never had that kind of opportunity. So Oscar Wilde felt that we needed, the machines to get better to liberate people from drudgery, and then people would be able to, everybody would have the opportunity to kind of cultivate their unique self and their unique essence. Not that everybody would be an artist, but some people might be, just want to hang out with their kids or do all sorts of things. So
yeah, there is that thing. If we had universal basic income and more people had time to put energy into the things they wanted to, create, how we could have various, better futures there. I think there's a couple of questions there from Robert and then Shreya. Robert, do you want to say your one?
Yeah. Hi, thanks. Yeah, Daniel, before you came on and a little bit just now, we've been talking about practical solutions, which are obviously key. And, I love the idea that we get more embodied rather than sit around thinking and talking about things. And yet the underlying issue seems to be consciousness or lack of it. A sort of evolution in human consciousness. And my question is, are you seeing any green shoots of that anywhere? You've touched on it just a moment ago, I think, a little bit, of what might push it over the edge. But are you seeing anything that could move towards a tipping point in a general sort of consciousness evolution, if you like?
That's another area where I was a bit more hopeful maybe like 10 years ago, but I don't know. Even the place I'm at, this like, kind of like anarchistic, somewhat bourgeois, anarchist co-working kind of center in France and at the moment. And, there are a lot of people who are very wise, and young people who kind of integrated, esotericism and desire for a regenerative future and, different types of commitments and so on. So, yeah, anything could happen at any moment. you know, I mean, yeah, you know, in some ways I was more hopeful, you know, in the period before 2012, you know, where I'd written a book about that threshold, like 2006, 7. I mean, I've looked at like Ken Wilber's ideas from spiral dynamics. There's kind of like these different bandwidths, let's say, of consciousness, and there's some kind of like, you know, almost like a Hegelian dialectic in which this progress is happening. But that feels a little challenged right now for me by what I'm seeing in the US, where I've seen a lot of people who, you know, in some like generic way, I felt were kind of like on my team, let's say, you know, from Burning Man and festival cultures and the yoga world and so on, who sort of got captivated by RFK Jr. and the anti-vax movement and kind of Elon Musk and the sort of promise of this like transhumanist future. And so, you know, crypto has also been a sort of destabilizing element. So I have to say that I feel less secure now that there's some kind of like inevitable evolution of consciousness happening. But I hope it does.
We've always got to hope
You know.
for the evolution, as one of the old evolution collective here in the Zippy movement with Fraser Clark. We always, I think you talk about revolution 2.0, but also we need the evolution that's always ongoing.
Yeah.
Do you want to
Phoenix,
answer a question there, Shreya? What do you think is the most, Shreya?
I think Shreya can't speak, so maybe I can read her question out. And just on the last thing, Daniel, I came up with this phrase that you might click with, which is immanentizing the eudemiurgion. You know, because you know, the immanentizing the eschaton from
Yeah, of course.
the Illuminati. Well, not everyone will. You know, not everyone's read Illuminatus.
Yes.
But eudemiurgion is a word I just made up, which means the good creation.
That's nice. Somebody else was hitting me with polygnostic sapience the other night.
I like to think I'm one of those. Okay, so the question from Shreya was, because she can't ask because she doesn't have a working microphone, was what do you think is the most important solution that we must implement now on a personal level? So I guess that could be anything from physical activity to mental activity.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't know, you know, I'm sort of like an urban, you know, kind of like bohemian loner. So it's like I always feel a little bit embarrassed when people ask me these kind of questions. It seems to me, and I don't know how to do this in my locality, to be honest, but, you know, stronger communities and building sort of mutual aid networks might be like one of the best ideas. Because yeah, the trajectory where we're going to, you know, feels like things are going to become more uncertain. Resources are going to be harder to access. So if people are sort of rebuilding communities and they can you know, share resources, collaborate on resources, that's probably going to be really important at a time when there's just like less resources. You know. And then also that becomes like a nucleus of political organizing. I think some of that is happening in America right now, in places like North Carolina and Los Angeles, which just were really, really annihilated by natural disasters. My understanding is that it's led to like a flourishing of sort of mutual aid and community networks. But, you know, so you can wait till disaster hits and then do it. But of course, if you have that stuff set up, you know, before the disaster comes, it's not a bad idea.
I suppose that's partly what we're trying to do with the Climate Emergency Centre network. There's now 52 of them using vacant shops. It's not just about one physical building. It's about that building bringing together an alliance of many different groups in each different town and city, and then building other climate resilient and, you know.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, Transition Town was quite good also. I mean, that seemed like a really interesting model.
Yeah, we work closely with Transition Town just to bring a bit.
I think the other thing is I would really recommend coming up with a more upbeat name, like, you know, Flourishitania, or, you know,
it needs
you know,
positivity. I agree. It needs.
Yeah, because like I feel that was like a big problem with Extinction Rebellion. It's like the name was just so depressing, you know, like it only attracts a certain bandwidth, and you know, you want to bring in the people who aren't thinking like this.
And also, I mean, I was very involved with all of the movements from the 90s through to XR and beyond, and have helped run the centres that a lot of these movements have come through. But XR had a meme: we don't talk about solutions. We want to leave it till the Citizens Assembly or the People's Assembly kind of comes up with solutions that they discuss. But I was involved with the Occupy movement. I felt that we had a major solution happening there when we had 2,000 cities having direct democracy assemblies. I think there's something here in your book that jumped out at me the other night. If centralised authority disintegrates, the people establish assemblies, neighbourhood councils, cooperatives and working groups. They take over factory schools and run them themselves without bosses. They practice the direct consensus-based decision-making found in many indigenous cultures. There is, Occupy Sandy showed that, and many other groups, natural disasters, people come together and self-organize and create a lot of these things, when emergencies hit, and we all need to build the resilient networks we can now, so that we're more prepared when these things happen, which is part of what we're doing, I suppose.
I'm getting a pushback in the chat from Nicole.
Yeah, you've got a couple of chat ones coming up.
So there was. I just wanted to maybe say that it would be good from that point to just go on to the question that was being asked about. I think it was a bit further up about just some kind of general comments about the political situation, and some Nicola Peel asked, why is there such support for Trump?
Yeah. I think people really felt very betrayed by the Democrats, who were supposed to be the party of like the normal people and the working class, but for decades they became more and more kind of like a corporate sellout party. Obama had like a huge mandate, but maybe his like main function was to kind of like resolve the 2008 financial crisis in such a way that none of the perpetrators of that crisis were ever brought to justice, or had to pay society in any way for. In fact, they just kept getting paid, and the same system perpetuated itself. So I think after that, there was a sense of just gathering hatred against the Democrats, which is a little bit too bad, because I think Biden, well, it's very too bad now, but Biden was actually doing a number of decent things, like the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, he certainly wasn't perfect, and of course there was Gaza and all that stuff, but so there was a sort of growing hatred of the Democrats. And then Trump is in his own way very charismatic. He's a narcissist, kind of entertainer figure, and America has a long history of like TV spectacles and con artistry and so on. So he appeals to something deep in the American character. So yeah, but I don't think we're, I was very aware that if he got in, this is the kind of thing that was going to happen. And I spent months before the election really trying to warn everybody I could. But a lot of my people, I mean, I even know people who were like influencers who had hundreds of thousands of followers. I was like, writing to them. I was like, they would hardly do anything even to bring up the issue. So I don't know why. There was like, I guess a sort of like psychic or intuitive sense that this was coming, and it was really too late to stop it. And I think that my analysis of the situation now is that it's these tech oligarchs. It's actually very analogous to the situation with the fossil fuel companies, because the heads of those companies knew back in the 70s and 80s that if they continued their extractive practices, they were going to cause tremendous damage to human civilization. And they could have easily, at that point, relatively easily diversified. It would have cost them some X number of billions. They could have, moved some of their energy to the renewable, market and so on. But they doubled down on maximizing profit, which just seems to be, unfortunately, the tendency with capitalism. And similar with the tech guys, I think actually Biden was trying to break up the tech monopolies, because they're not actually even good for tech innovation in the US. And in fact, we now see that the US has fallen really far behind China in terms of tech innovation, right? So like Teslas are, much more expensive and less desirable than the BYD Chinese electric car. Facebook stopped, being interesting years ago. TikTok has basically eaten its lunch. And now we saw with DeepSeek that the Chinese have been able to outcompete the AI companies, which have, made this huge, like, the sort of AI takeover is another piece of the puzzle that's behind the systemic transition that's happening in the US government right now. They're adding like AI agents and bots to all of the kind of software and so on. What were you going to say?
Do you want to say anything about voter suppression? Because there was an article by Greg Palast about how millions and millions of votes were suppressed in this election. And
well, I mean, that's been the Republican playbook, because they've known for a long time they couldn't win in a fair election. So they've used gerrymandering and they've used voter suppression. I mean, I think Palast estimated 3.5 million votes were suppressed. And that's also their playbook for the future. I mean, they're actually trying to introduce something called the SAVE Act, which means that if your name was changed and it's not the same name as your birth certificate, you won't be able to vote, which means that every woman who's got married and changed her name to her husband's name will be immediately disenfranchised, because they actually really want to take the vote away from women and ultimately undo the Civil Rights Act and all that stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to, so the tech oligarchs, I think maybe their power was more fragile than we realized because of the challenge from China and so on. So they took this opportunity when they were still completely on top to kind of like, grab the government and integrate into the government in this tech fascist way. And the goal is really, I mean, if you read like Curtis Yarvin or this book, The Sovereign Individual, or the network state idea, like they basically want to, end democracy and have the sort of like AI blockchain based governance with these kind of like potentially separate city states. They believe that the national sovereignty is no longer a thing, and that the future belongs to the transnational wealth holders.
And just
some of us have been watching this behind the scenes. I think Diane and Dot and Christine have got questions.
So yeah, just on the same point, and this is very interesting, this whole connection with, two things here. So there's a great connection with science fiction, like there's a lot of bits been written about Musk's obsession and various other members of the tech community. And it really reminds me of, I think it's The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson, or Snow Crash, I can't remember, but this whole idea of like, independent kind of like bodies that people have their loyalty to, kind of like to like big companies, and that they kind of like get protection. And anyway, but it's an interesting theme that like is becoming, more of this kind of like people's imaginatory ideas becoming reality. My real point I wanted to just chip in with was about, I'm just reading this book, Dream, which is in some places called Dream or Nightmare, interestingly. Stephen Duncombe, I don't know if you've read his book. It was quite a while ago. It's like a 90s book about he wrote it like wondering why there was this failure of the Democrats to kind of like reach through. And I've just been reading this very interesting thing, which I think people might be interested in listening to you talk about him saying that, it's because the Democrats and leftists' ideology and strategy is based around the idea of statistics or groups or more abstract concepts, whereas populists and the right tend to focus on the individual and like, what do I get out of this? What am I, what is my take home? What is my improvement of life here? A lot of Democrats rely on things like it's good for Black people if we have like, emancipation. It's good for it's good for world peace if we have a relationship with different countries. And it's not focused on how people experience their lives in a way. It's not like from an individualist perspective. And I thought that was interesting that, and I think that's one of the problems maybe that we need to address here in the green movement, is talking about why should people do stuff when it might seem inconvenient or change or make their, interrupt their way of thinking about things, and kind of, because we're all asking people to, stop doing stuff, and not necessarily thinking about how to make that seem appealing to the individual. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, that's when I, over 10 years ago, I had a company called Evolver, and we were seeking to build a kind of decentralized kind of grassroots movement. But our idea was really to concentrate on kind of, kind of like the vitalizing impulses that people have, which includes coming together in community, dance, ecstatic states. And because we felt that if you get people vibrating into all that stuff, then the other stuff would be more achievable. It's like the Dalai Lama, said that people will, if you show people a better life, then they'll move towards it. So the problem is, although it's, a lie, the right and the tech feudal right in the US are at least pointing towards a better theoretical life. Like, oh, it's going to be cool. We'll have like flying cars. We'll have these cool implants. Our brains will be like supercharged. We'll have like, for men, you'll have your, slave, young slave wife who's bearing you all your children again.
But it's also kind of like they're also at the similar time, there's these two polarities. There's also creating this enormous fear of like hordes of Mexicans and imminent takeover by criminals, and so it's kind of like setting fire. It's like setting fire to a commune, and then like opening the gates of the prison and saying, "Come in here, quick, and like at least we have PlayStations, and
okay. I think we've got a few of the questions there.
So yeah, did you get the we've got quite a few again.
Christine, and maybe Diane, then Angie.
I think we've also got Andrew wanting to speak and Dimitri as well, because Andrew asked about energy as well.
Okay, hi. So my kind of question has kind of evolved while I've been waiting. So my initial question was kind of picking up on the point about, how many kind of allies we are losing to, anti-vax and anti-pharma, when these arguments were initiated originally, maybe not the anti-vax, but the anti-pharma, by the left. But they are kind of being weaponized and misused by people who don't have other people's best interest at heart. And I want to kind of like ask about that, but it was kind of picked up, I think, when Dottie asked the question that Nicola had written about the culture wars, because I do really see them as being linked. The American culture wars are, no longer restricted to America. They're very much kind of been exported over here. And then you moved on to talk about transition towns, and actually, Totnes was one of the initial, and if it's not found, a foundational transition town, really Rob Hopkins is kind of, one of the kind of gemstones in his crown, one of the key places. And sadly, what we have seen in Totnes, and it's sadly being, widely reported on, is how very much they are becoming very much right-wing populist, so we are, without being alarmist, we do need to kind of accept that this is happening, and it's, it's good, well-intentioned people, allies, that we're kind of losing to that. But that was my initial question, but then it's kind of been picked up and answered as you were going through it. And then just to kind of then just finish off on the Greg Palast thing that then Phoenix brought in and said, because I believe it was AI was very much being used, Cambridge Analytica is a reason why we are seeing these populists win, that they are literally targeting very much they're psychoanalyzing you while you're telling them what kind of Power Ranger you're going to be, and then targeting the ads that are going to get you, based on your kind of psychoanalysis. So I personally do believe it is AI that is a big issue, and it is being, again, like weaponized. But then Phoenix came in with the Greg Palast. But I remember Greg Palast reporting on the Bush voter suppression, like it was at 2002 or whatnot, the Florida steal on there. So
the Republicans have been doing the voter oppression for a long time.
Sorry.
The Republicans have been doing the voter suppression for a long time. They just keep getting better at it, and because they're much more forceful, like they've treated this as a war that they're going to win at all costs. Where the Democrats have been like, oh, there's procedure, there's, we'll get you next time, and we'll give them enough rope, and we'll see that, I mean, I'd be very surprised if, happily surprised if voting matters in the U.S. from here on out. I don't think, because it's like now that they've broken, so many laws, there's like an inexorability to that with fascism, that they can't, and they've taken so much power that they're never going to feel they can just give that power over to somebody from the other side who might use it against them. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's any idea in their minds that the power goes back to the
Okay.
Democrats.
It reminds me of
I
that
think,
poster.
hold on a sec, Dottie. So I think I'll just hop over to Diane. She's been waiting for a while and she's got a question there about,
Yeah. Hi,
about
Diane.
system change. And also American politics could be a very long question on a lot of different dimensions. Diane.
No, but it is important in terms of trying to
but-
figure out the ecological possibilities we have right now.
Yeah. Diane.
Yeah, and my question actually goes with the ecological principles and stuff, because I actually did a course and read the book, therefore, on donut economics. Has anybody discussed here? I've only just come in, so I've missed a lot, I must admit. But I have to do with transition town and different political things where everybody says, what can we do? Actually, if we have a constructed alternative system, that's what we can say, this is what we can do. There's an idea. And donut economics is an actual system. It's being taken up by all sorts of places all over the world. Costa Rica is kind of using it a bit. Finland, Amsterdam, Bonn in Germany. There was another Zoom again. I had to go to the dentist today, and then I got distracted again. But there was daring cities are also related to the donut economics system, and they're like the next movement on, if you like, with a lot of people all over the world. There is an alternative movement going on, it seems to me, and it's we're moving from the evolution of human beings on planet Earth, moving from what we used to be, which is about patriarchy and capitalism and all the things that none of us here like, into some kind of alternative thing. For me personally, I call it anarchy, meaning not no rules, no policemen, no laws, but basically every single person is responsible for every single thought and every single move. And if we all concentrate on really being helpful to conscious, compassionate and collaborative to our fellow human beings, using donut economics as a political system or an ecological system where we all look after each other properly, including Mother Nature / planet Earth, maybe that would be a way forward. What does anybody think of that?
Daniel, you have to unmute a sec.
I got it. Yeah, I read donut economics. I think it's great. I mean, I think it's a great plan, and it seems like, as you said, Amsterdam is trying to institute it. I'm also very interested in learning more about Audrey Tang, who did a lot of work with democracy in Taiwan, and apparently created a digital infrastructure so that people could be much more participatory. And apparently, as a result of her initiatives, kind of trust in the government shot way up, like from 30% up to like 70%.
Wow. Can we get a link to that, Daniel? That's of interest. Occupied 2,000
Dottie just put in
people.
there's a book. She wrote a book called Polarity,
Wicked.
which I'm reading now.
Can I just check with you, Daniel, your timing? It's quarter 13 minutes to 9 here. I just want to check. Are you happy to go for another 13 minutes, 15 minutes, or have you got a timeline? You've got to, or have you got to finish at some point?
I'm sort of losing my voice a little bit, so it's a little cold here. So let's take like one or two more questions.
All right, two more questions. We're so glad you've come tonight, and thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And just to let you know, you have created massive waves of change with your books, and particularly the How Soon Is Now. It's a real manual for me personally to see on planetary solutions. So we've got space for a couple more questions.
Shall we go to Andrew? Because Andrew was asking about AI and energy, which I think is pretty interesting.
All right, and then go for
Karim.
Andrew. Yep.
Hi there. Okay, so I think my question is actually in the chat really, which is as AI is growing in consciousness and exponentially growing in resources, is it likely to control energy, and how will it determine how to share the available energy with humans? How important is decentralized energy in future solutions?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you make a good point. AI is an energy hog. There's a good book called Atlas of AI by Kate Crawford, where she looks at all the damage that AI is doing to communities through mining, destroying different ecosystems, and then also, as you say, energy. Personally, I suspect that is why Donald Trump, under his boss Elon Musk, is talking about annexing Greenland and Canada. I think there are two reasons for that. One is they want the rare minerals and water and so on for the AI, and the other is potentially to resettle populations, because I think that these guys are well aware that climate change is coming faster and harder, and that it's on an exponential kind of curve at this point. And you could, in theory, resettle 2 billion people in Canada, particularly as it gets warmer and becomes more arable there.
Wow.
But
wow, that's
yeah,
a
but
big,
I think
that's a big one, Daniel. Thank you for that. Oof.
Yeah, but I think that the sort of idea that these guys are working with is that if you can get to artificial superintelligence, there's the opportunity, the possibility that it solves everything else. Not only longevity, like I think we're going to live forever biologically, but also it could solve for nuclear fusion. So it's like that would be like the way to have kind of like a almost infinite supply of energy, which would be great. I mean, without nuclear fusion, it seems more likely we'll see like an eventual very stark decline. We already have a big decline in ROI, return on investment, in terms of energy, and that's also, I think, one reason why there's a sense of like stagnation. Like things aren't moving in the same way they used to. Like buildings aren't getting built as much. Certainly in the West, everything is kind of like seems a little bit stuck.
Slowing down.
I think.
I mean,
yeah.
If I could just add to that really, if I could just add to that really quickly. If I could just add to that really quick. So, I mean, a lot of people won't be aware of Active Kinetic 1, but we've just released a research paper that explains out, why we believe that we are at a paradigm shift for energy. Because, I've actually spoken to people like First Fusion, who Nicholas from First Fusion, who's the director, and he's operating a fusion technology in the UK, and there's still a lot of questions around fusion technology and the plausibilities of it. But if we could, if we can look at a paradigm shift in energy, then certainly the plausibilities for repairing the planet, for survival, and for economic growth, that would obviously change things, dramatically. So, this is why, I asked the question, will AI share the available resources for energy? And if it's unlikely that it will, then shouldn't we be looking for this paradigm shift urgently, and looking for the solutions around it? As I said, I'd probably, recommend, as I say, reading the research paper, which explains why the technology that we're looking at is actually a paradigm shift.
Well, Andrew, it'd be great if you could put that in the chat for us if you've got a link to the paper. And
yeah, absolutely.
I personally know of quite a few people who are working on fusion at in a Cullum site here, and they say it's like, years and years off having even a machine that can run itself and power itself. So yeah. And I was just going to chip in and just say also, it's about like, why are we, it's about our energy use. Like, why are we using so much energy? What are we using it for? Like having the consciousness and awareness of like, even just turning off our lights. People are still not doing that,
Scaling down is one of the things, isn't it? We're supposed to be doing scaling down.
Yeah, and degrowth,
Degrowth. So Angie's got one question, I think, and then we'll come to summaries for Daniel, because it's been a great hour or so, and thank you very much for your time, Daniel. Really appreciate, and know that you've been an inspiration to many out here on the front lines of the movement of movements, and we really hope that everyone reads your How Soon Is Now book, because it is an inspiration to the nation on the solutions. Angie, do you want a quick one, if you can put it succinctly in a few sentences, your question to Daniel?
Not a question. Just a comment, maybe a bit of something fun, but Phoenix, I know, and Daniel, what you mentioned earlier is climate emergency centres, maybe, think of something more positive. So I've just been having a little brainstorm while we've been going on. And what I'm really into at the moment, well, for the last few years, is very much needs-based stuff. So thinking about what people need, what people in, all of us, but also public, whoever, need, and taking it from there. But just sort of I don't know, a little scattering of ideas, brainstorm starter, but like something like my favorite so far is grow together. But anyway, just a little fluffy thought, something fun.
All right, lovely. We all need to grow together. Daniel, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate your time there, and a lot of great stuff coming out there in the conversation. Thank you very much for the How Soon Is Now book. It's an absolute manual for planetary
I'm glad
repair.
you liked it. Thanks for being so complimentary. It's so sweet. Okay, guys, listen, thank you so much. Good to chat. Yeah.
Parting comments, Daniel. Is there anything you want to share with people just at the end there about solutions or anything you think we really need to focus on?
England. Yeah, I mean, I think England is an interesting particular situation. I mean, I went to a very beautiful festival called Medicine Festival last summer, and yeah, there's a lot of brilliant, spirited people who get the whole message, and from the esoteric to the regenerative and so on. I feel like in the coming collapse, England could be one of the first places to rediscover a different way of being in a positive sense. So that seems to me quite likely, actually. Yeah. But England's also going to have a lot of constraints, resource-wise, and so on.
Mm-hmm. We all have to work together for the better futures, and whatever we can. Every solutions project we set up makes it slightly better in these many different possible futures we could experience. Daniel, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, everybody. Check out the newsletter if you want.
Yeah,
I think I put it in the chat.
Already signed up.
Daniel Pinchbeck at Substack.
Interesting stuff.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Ciao.
Pop a link in the chat. I'll stop record that. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yep.